before we do that, I want to talk about an important stat, right? So typically you would, maybe spend half a day on making the presentation, but the investor on average will spend, less than 3 minutes on actually analyzing the pitch deck. DocSend, which is a popular platform uh, to use, has this data at around 2 minutes 42 seconds roughly, right? So you're being judged within that time frame. Now, this when you read this stat, this can be very it could mislead you to think that what this means is that your pitch deck has to be very flashy or it has to be very crisp, in the sense that you need to grab the investor's attention in a very short period of time. What I'd like to emphasize on is that this is an average, right? So the 2 minutes 30 seconds is an average that the investor will spend. Basically, if I am an investor and if I'm spending less than a minute on your pitch deck, you're not probably going to get the meeting, right? But if I'm spending more than 5 minutes, up to 10 minutes, that means that the pitch deck has done its job in gaining my interest, right? And that most likely results in a meeting. So your objective via the pitch deck is to get into the second camp, right? That how do you incentivize the investor to spend more time on your deck? What that means is that the deck has to be insight heavy, right? You need to talk in your own voice. You need to be able to communicate your ideas very clearly and in a very concise manner as well, right? So that's what we're going to focus on in today's session. I'm going to give you a framework, right, that we use at Malpani Ventures. So it's a very simple PAT5 framework that we call. It draws upon popular terms in startup lingo. So PAT5 is problem, answer, TAM, technology, timing, team, and traction. Right. So we'll elaborate on each letter. Typically, I prefer this order as well for the pitch deck, because what this results is that it creates a structure for you to work with during the pitch deck and ensures that you don't miss out on any point. So typically what I'd like to see in a pitch deck is the problem slide first, right? So what you're trying to answer is what are you trying to fix? Typically, especially as young founders, the problem that I see is that a lot of the pitch decks will focus on the sector rather than the problem, right? So if you are, say, preparing or you're building something for the healthcare sector, I don't want the pitch deck to say that I'm going to fix Indian healthcare, right? I would like you to say that, I'm preparing a SaaS platform which works for nurses in ICU centers, for elderly patients, right? So you've got to be very narrow with your problem definition. And it matters because, if you've not gotten narrow, it means that you've not researched your problem well enough. So what works and what doesn't work in this slide is typically, when you go vague, right? Like when you're trying to make very broad-ended statements that don't really attract the investor's attention. Typically, your first slide is what catches the investor's eye. So you want to lead with a stat, right? So if you say that 95% of ultrasounds in India are not manufactured locally, right? So now that's a stat that I'm interested in, right? And then I want to understand what you're doing to solve for it, right? So there has to be one leading indicator that makes your business viable, and that makes me as an investor interested in understanding what you're building. Secondly, what I'd like to say is that you've got to do the work of speaking to potential customers. So let's say you're continuing on the same example, that if you're building for nurses at ICU centers, then you should have actually spoken to at least 10, 15, 20 hospitals, right? And should come up with a point of view from their lens, right? So the problem statement should not feel theorized, right? It should feel as if it is lived from the customer's end, right? So if you're describing a Kirana wala's problem, describe the Kirana wala's Monday morning, right? Don't try to theorize how does the Kirana wala operate on a Monday, right? You have to actually spend maybe 4 or 5 Mondays with the Kirana wala if you've got to come up with a good problem slide. Lastly, what I'd like to leave you guys with for this slide is that don't focus on the size of the problem in this slide, right? There is a temptation to say, okay, this is a very big problem. What I'd like to see, or any investor likes to see, is the acuteness of the problem, right? That if this is a deep burning problem, then it makes a business much more viable, right? So if the problem is something that is felt every day by a potential customer, then he's more likely to pay for it. So that is the point you want to emphasize in this slide. The next slide obviously is going to be your solution. So the way to frame this is that, if you've defined the problem well enough, then the solution has to feel fairly obvious, right? So the first slide essentially leads on to the second slide. Again, now, as young founders, there is this ambition, to maybe you're building a SaaS platform, right, which is effectively a payroll solution, right? But you want to call it the operating system for restaurants, right? So you like to use these grand words that you pick up, reading Y Combinator, A16Z, whatever you guys read, right? And but what that results is that the investor feels that there's a disconnect, and it feels artificial in the sense that you're not actually describing what you're building today, right? So there is a way to get into your vision without diluting the actual reality of your business today. Secondly, the thing I see a lot is that a lot of young founders will try to use a lot of jargon to make it sound that they've understood the industry well, right? So nothing could be worse than you using jargon which the investor does not understand. So you would want to simplify it to the extent possible. Now, some of you here may be more technical guys. So one of the questions that we get is that how technical should the deck be? Right? So a simple rule of thumb is to say that if you are pitching to, or if you're talking to a smart person whom you respect, but who's not from within your industry, how would you describe your problem and your solution, right? That's how the pitch deck should read like, right? It should be legible enough for a smart person to understand, but it should not be very jargon heavy or very domain specific that someone outside of your industry doesn't get it at all. Right? That's the whole context. Lastly, again, here I emphasize, or I re-emphasize on being narrow, right? So what I'd like to see is that if your feature solves a very specific problem, then that is much more valuable than a platform that theorizes a lot of problems, right? Like, so if you lead from the problem and you can demonstrate a solution that actually solves for it, right? So if you demonstrate a before and after scenario, then that makes a world of a difference in convincing the investor that this is the right solution for something like this. TAM, right? So, I mean, now all of you know what this means, is the total addressable market. Why this matters? This matters more from the investor lens rather than the founder lens, right? Because as investors, we are constrained by some, by our fund life cycle, right? So we want to have businesses that can grow very large for it to make IRR sense for us, right? But don't let that define your TAM slide. So typically, we'll get these pitch decks which say I'm building for $1 billion market, right? And as young founders, I feel that you should not be making these statements unless you really have data backing it up, right? You can become $1 billion business, right? What you should focus on is that, can I build 500 crore business first with this solution, right? Also, the other thing that I don't like are those nested diagrams, right? Like the TAM, SAM, SOM, right? Which is a very typical thing that you see in textbooks. Again, they are not, they're not very practically useful unless you've done bottoms up market sizing, right? So the way I would present the slide is that, there are X number of potential customers for me. Y is what they are willing to pay, or, they would be willing to pay. And Z is the target, or, my achievable market from the X that I've identified. And so that's a better way of presenting your market sizing. Again, you don't want to go over the top. You would rather be conservative, and you should have defensible arguments in the sense that you can actually defend that, okay, why am I saying that X is 10 lakh businesses in India today? And so that's a better case to make. Again, I reiterate that what matters more is the size of the problem, right? So not the size of the sector. So if you have a 500 crore market with a deeply burning problem, right, where the customers are willing to pay, that is much more valuable than a 50,000 crore market which has a very lukewarm problem, where you will face a lot of difficulties in convincing the customer to buy your product. timing, right? Like, so this is a very underrated slide, and a slide which is skipped by most young founders. Again, why this matters most is because if you are raising VC money, what you're doing is you're raising very large amounts of capital to compress business building into a very short time frame. And so typically, if you see traditionally, businesses are built over a 10, 20, 30-year old time frame, right? But what you're trying to do with VC money is compress that into a 5 to 8 year cycle, which is extremely difficult to do, right? And without a why now, right? Without a specific tailwind for your business, it is practically not possible, right? So then it becomes very essential that you explain to the VC that why is this the right, or why is this the opportune moment to be building this business. Now, typically, there are three key drivers for any tailwind, right? Either it is technology related, we've all seen the advent of AI and the businesses that it has unlocked. It could be regulatory, right? Where, let's say the Indian government has now uh, eased its stance of procuring defense related materials from India, right? So that's a regulatory tailwind, right? Or it could be behavioral, right? Like, folks like you are now more focused on eating protein foods or, well labeled consumer products, right? So a good founder is able to identify this trend and match it to his specific solution, right? So unless you're able to explain to a VC that why this trend marries with my solution or the problem I'm solving for, it becomes very difficult for the VC to give you money. So this is a very underrated side. So there is actually a stat which says that VCs actually spend the most amount of time on understanding the why now of a business, right? Because that is what that really matters. The market makes the business. It's not the other way, right? So it's very essential that you think through this slide. Um, the next is technology. So I've defined it as technology and business model. What you're trying to essentially explain here is that how are your customers being served today? In the sense that you've identified a problem, you've identified a solution, but your existing customer base or your potential customer base is being served by your peers, right? So what are you doing differently? You have to come up with defensible answers to explain that what is your differentiator in the long run, or why will you win and endure, right? So it could be a mix of things, and there are enough case studies and enough business books explaining what results in moats, right? So no VC is expecting you to have moats built into your business from day one, but you should have an answer as to why this business will be an enduring one, right? Why will this business compound over a period of time? So it could be a mix of things. It could be proprietary data, it could be distribution access, it could be the advantage of scale, it could be that you're just simply much more cost efficient, it could be that your business model is counterposition to incumbents, right? That it is something that the incumbents would never attempt without killing their book, right? So some of these are good examples of putting or explaining why your business will win. One of the things that we are taught in business schools is you have to explain your business in a Gartner style quadrant, right, where you place your business against potential competition. So there is this urge of founders to place their business amongst the best, right, and everyone else is doing a very poor job. Or you create a checklist and you say that, okay, my business will work because XYZ is not doing this. But what matters is that you explain that your feature or your solution or your use case, why does it matter to your customer, right? And why will it lead you to win? So it is essential for you guys to spend some time in explaining as to why there is a clear distincting factor between your business and others out there. Team value. So this is a very self-explanatory slide. Um, what what I will say here is that one of the things that, or one of the complaints that we face is that VCs or investors tend to fund folks from IITs or IIMs, right? Now, so this is a fact; it can't be denied, right? And credentials do matter, right? So if you've spent some time in an industry, or if you've spent some time in a very fast accelerating startup, or the fangs of the world, it does matter, right? And that pitch deck is likely to get more time. But the number one credential that you as a young founder can have is if you can explain that you've lived the customer's reality, right? Like, or if you've lived the problem yourself. So how do you do that as a young founder? Probably three or four ways, right? Either you've grown up in a business family, right? And you've seen some of these problems firsthand, or you've been very enthusiastic about a specific domain and you've built projects, right? Or if you've built prototypes in the past, or simply you've just spent a disproportionate amount of time interviewing potential customers. Even that could be a good way to make this slide up, right? Where you say that I have this skill set and I've spent X number of hours researching this, and this is why I feel this solution could work, right? But make it very obvious that why you are the right founder, the right founding team for this business. I mean, this is the most important question that any investor is trying to understand or explain, as to what is the sense of the founder market fit here. Lastly, traction matters, right? So again, as early founders or early stage businesses, it is very difficult to show that you are making revenue or you have paying customers. But what is critical to show is that you have momentum, right? So no one is really expecting you to have customers who are paying you on time, or you have more than maybe 10 customers. But what investors expect is that you have to show proof of progress, right? So once you've identified the problem, did you speak to potential users? Did you build a working prototype? Do you have beta users? Do you have an LOI in place, right? So stuff like that. So the higher you climb on this ladder of proof, the better are your chances of getting money from an investor, right? So in an ideal state, you would be making revenue, but it's not practically possible for our companies to do this. But very essential that you explain, with a timeline, ideally, that this is what we've achieved so far. What this does is that it de-risks the investor's call, in the sense that I don't have to worry about whether the speed of the founding team is good enough, right? Especially in today's AI world, what we are looking for is the speed and the iterative things that a founding team does that enables the business to succeed. I'm going to just skip this because I'd like you guys to ask some of these questions. Um, so ultimately, you also have to think that what is the investor trying to understand when you send across the pitch deck, right? So I think if you were to take one key takeaway, it is this: that the pitch deck should be able to explain to the investor, and he should be able to verbalize it in his own words to his team or to his partners, that this is the business within 30 seconds, right? So if your pitch deck cannot allow the VC to do that, it is very unlikely that you will be called for a meeting, right? So your pitch deck is essentially trying to compress the essence of what you're trying to build, right? So there's a very beautiful word for this. It's called compressance. It's used by a public markets investor in the US, right? Where you're trying to compress the essence of your business, right? So the pitch deck essentially should be doing that, right? That you're explaining, that the VC should be able to explain the business to anyone within 30 seconds. And so should the founder. Some of the other questions are fairly obvious, but ideally the problem should feel real, right? After I read a pitch deck, I should want to say, okay, well, maybe if ultrasounds are not being made in India, why is this happening, right? And can we solve for it, right? It should feel real, and your solution should feel obvious. Then it makes a good, compelling case that I can present to my team internally. Lastly, we've spoken about stage appropriate proof, which is the ladder. Lastly, how strong is the founder market fit? As I re-emphasize, this is the most important question, right? You've got to position yourself as the best team for this specific problem, right? So there are several ways that we spoke about, but you've got to be able to demonstrate that I am the right person to solve for this, right? Or if anyone is going to solve for this specific problem, it will be us. Okay, lastly, just in closing, I want to say is that the deck is the door, right? So ultimately what matters is the business behind it, right? Like, so if you've not thought through the business, if you've not done your research, if you've not actually built things, if you've not actually tried to earn revenue, none of this really matters, right? So a very good pitch deck will maybe get you a meeting, but it will eventually result in a rejection. So what you should optimize for is the business first, right? Don't over optimize for making really perfect deck slides. Even at MV, what we focus on is that, is the founder able to explain with clarity, right? And are they able to express it honestly, right? And there are some things that the founders will not know or should not know. So are they honest about it? So the objective of the pitch deck is, it's similar to a movie trailer, right? Like, so I'm sure all of you guys have seen Dhurandhar, right? The trailer itself should make you want to see the movie, right? So the pitch deck is like a trailer. What it should result in is that me buying a ticket to see the movie, right? Which is the meeting with you guys. Yeah. So I'll close with that. Thank you. We can do some questions. I have add some more slides, but I don't want to berate you. But open to questions. Yes. Hmm. So see, if you're seeking money from a VC, it's very difficult unless it's a incubator kind of a fund, right? Where they are quite okay if you've not started the business as yet and they're willing to fund you at idea stage. But most VCs will want you to take the first risk, right? Like, so if you don't have enough conviction in your own business that you leave something to do, or if you sacrifice something to do this specifically, right? Like, why do dropouts get funded a lot? Because they've proven that I'm willing to take the risk of dropping out of a big university because I believe that this business could be bigger than what I would make if I were at the university, right? So the burden of proof is always on the founder, right? So you can't expect a VC to say, oh, just because you have a very cool idea, it doesn't mean that the VC will fund you unless they're very student specific incubator like funds, which are in India very rare, and the high quality ones are almost non-existent, I would say. So unless it's a very difficult thing to become a promoter, right, or to become an entrepreneur. So if you're not willing to take the plunge yourself, and if you're not willing to show some momentum, some progress that I spoke about, you can't really expect the VC. And you would receive a very different answer from someone else, but I'm just giving you brutal honesty. Yeah. Yes.
In early stage businesses, storytelling or numbers, what is more important according to you? If I'm pitching it to you, a business idea, so what will matter to you more, a storytelling idea or an idea which is backed by numbers?
So it's always narrative and numbers. So I would not discount either. I would not say that one matters more than most, especially if you're trying to raise funds, right? So I've seen enough great businesses not get funding because they are not able to explain their story well, right? So that matters. And all of us understand via stories. So stories is, very critical. But if it is just stories and if it is just air, then ultimately you're not going to build a business. I should not be saying this, but the unfortunate reality is that in the VC world, stories matter more. That is the unfortunate reality. But if you are really serious about building a business, right, that you want to run for your life, then both are equally important. Yeah. Right. So I think one of the questions that I feel a lot of young founders have is that how formal should my pitch deck be, right? Or how can I ensure that it does not come across as immature in the sense. So I'd say that you have to lead with defining the problem very well and being very specific, right? If you come out of the blocks by saying that I'm building for, that I'm going to revolutionize Indian quick commerce, or the Indian kirana stores, right? Then that ultimately makes me disbelieve what you're saying, right? So you have to start very narrow and then build on your traction. Um, the other things that could feel immature is if you make statements like I have no competition, right, or I am building a product which practically will not have any peers. It's a Again, these statements are very theoretical. They don't exist in the practical world. What you want to do is, even if you don't have a competition that you can identify today, your competition is that your customer not paying, right, or the competition of inertia, which is a very big competitor, right? So always explain, what are the barriers to getting the customer to pay for you. What are the last question I'd say is that what are the red flags that investors usually observe is, again, if you explain or if you make claims that you're the best in the business, right? So be honest about where you are, especially as a young founder, and state that these are the capabilities that you need to bring on board to be able to build a business. right? So that's what I'll leave you with. Thank you. Okay.